So observer wards are probably the single most important item in the game. Slap this bad boy at a location to grant vision around it. These guys are permanently invisible and need to be revealed by a source of true sight. This means from items like gem or sentries, or certain skills like Zeus's lightning bolt or Clockwork's rocket with a talent, but not dust of appearance. Wards are a ward type unit that have a hit counter instead of an HP bar. That means they take 2 hits to kill from a hero or 8 hits to kill from a non-hero unit. Each team gets 2 wards to start the game off, and they restock over time, and your team can have up to 4 wards banked at once, and this stock is shared across your team. But if you're letting wards hit 4 in stock, don't just blame your support, blame your entire team and yourself. Yellow wards are completely free, and it's your entire team's job to place them. And killing enemy yellow wards will grant you gold and experience scaling with the game's duration, while also denying enemy vision. If you see your ward getting attacked, you can actually also try to deny it to prevent your enemy from getting the ward bounty. And if for some reason you just want to remove your own ward, you can deny it from full HP if you choose to do so. You usually want to place this on a high ground spot somewhere on the map to grant vision over the area. This allows you to monitor enemy activity in the warded spot. And you don't have to see where the enemy is to have the ward be valuable. Sometimes knowing where the enemy isn't is just as important. And at the start of the game, you'll usually see 1 yellow ward devoted primarily to the mid laner. Also, if you're a melee hero trying to de-ward, you get a bit of extra attack range when attacking ward units, so you can de-ward uphill. And yellow wards also stack with sentry wards, or blue wards, are another consumable ward item that let you control vision. Slap this bad boy at a location to grant true sight for your team in that area. This lets you detect invisible enemy units, including enemy wards within the effective radius. Note that these wards have a shorter radius than observer wards on their own, and they also do not grant vision. However, they do grant some vision in a very small radius around them for a short time when you place them. If you think a spot is warded, put a sentry ward there first. In fact, you should always be putting sentries first if you ever plan on warding a spot. That is because if you place an observer ward first, and they already have an observer and sentry combo on that spot, your enemy will know it's warded and will eventually de-ward it to collect the bounty. And you generally don't want to ward where you've already de-warded, because that's kind of a sign that you already have vision there. And if all you see when you place down a blue ward is a lone enemy sentry ward at a high ground spot, most of the time you should not kill it. The sentry ward still being up will usually make enemies think that the spot is safe and hasn't been de-warded yet. And they usually won't have the vision to check for themselves unless they buy another yellow ward. You see how I don't reveal my ward's position by removing the enemy sentry? Very demure, very mindful. If you're a support, you typically want to buy 1 or 2 of these during the laning stage. This lets you block the enemy pull camp or de-ward any wards blocking your own pull camp. You might also want to hand 1 off to the mid laner so they can take down the enemy mid lane wards as well. If your mid laner can de-ward the enemy yellow ward and they don't counter, it gives them a pretty decent early advantage in gold, XP, and map control. Sentries stock up to 8 at a time, and like obs wards, they restock over time. They are always valuable for de-warding and blocking enemy camps, but they become even more valuable the more invisibility heroes the enemy has. And unlike observer wards, though, they cost about 50 gold to buy in place. Dust of Appearance is another anti-invis consumable. Use it to create a field of revealing dust around you. Any unit within the field is revealed from invisibility, and if they have an invis condition, they are also slowed and take a bit of chip damage. This effect also lingers for a short time when the enemy leaves the field. When facing an invis hero, you should always be buying both dust and sentries. Sentries are proactive invis detection. They'll let you tell when an enemy invis hero is in an area, and dust is reactive. It's useful for chasing down invis heroes when you know they're already there. Smoke of Deceit is a game-changing X-Factor item that only costs 50 gold. Pop it with your team, and you and your allied heroes and any controlled units are smoked. This is a special condition, meaning that you are hidden from the enemy team on the map, even through things like wards. You also get a nice move speed boost. The person who used the smoke can also touch other heroes that were not smoked in case they want to join in the fight. The smoke condition breaks when you get too close to an enemy hero or structure, or if you execute an auto attack. The main use of smoke is to execute a smoke gank. This is when you group up with your team to pop a smoke and hunt down a valuable enemy. You ideally want to get a kill on a key target like a farming core or multiple kills per smoke usage. Smoke ganks are risky gambits, but they can pay off with a nice lead or a comeback if you're playing from behind. It's also great for manipulating your teammates to finally group up instead of farming forever and throwing. Seriously, if your team just doesn't want to group up, just call for a smoke gank. It works 90% of the time. You only get a handful of smoke charges at a time, and they take a while to restock. Use them wisely and never let them stack up to 3 in the shop. The Tango is the classic regen item. You target a tree to destroy it, and in return, you gain some extra regen. Buying 1 Tango gets you 3 charges, but don't use them all in one go since the regen doesn't stack with itself. It just refreshes the duration. At any point, you can share a Tango with a teammate to give them a single Tango that lasts for about a minute. And you can't just spam buy this for mass regen though, since like wards, these have a shared stock across your team. However, it's not unheard of to buy 2 sets for yourself if you think you're heading into a very annoying lane. In most games, Tangos are only ever bought during the laning stage. The regen is a bit slow, but it persists through taking damage, which makes it helpful in lanes when you're actively getting pressure pressured. Unlike Healing Salve is the burst healing option for the early game. Use this item to gain a ton of health in a relatively short time, at least compared to tangos. These also have a shared stock across your team. You should take care to not take any damage from enemy heroes while using it though, since any hero based damage you take will cancel the healing effect prematurely. Thus, you should be very careful about popping a Healing Salve while in vision of heroes like Zeus, Clockwork, and Vengeful Spirit, since they have means of breaking this effect from a whole screen away. Also, you can use it on teammates, but it only heals for half the duration it normally would. Usually just better to use it on yourself unless they're really desperate. Clarity is pretty much the mana version of the Healing Salve. It has the same don't touch me while I'm regenning effect and also comes from a shared stock, except that it heals mana instead of health. If you're a support, you'll usually want to load up on these and other regen items in the early game. This will give you more resources to trade and harass in lane. The bottle is typically an item exclusively purchased by mid laners. This item heals both health and mana and has 3 uses. However, the item still remains despite being used thrice, just emptied out. You can fill the bottle by revisiting the fountain or by picking up a power rune. Water runes and bounty runes, however, only restore 2 charges instead of the usual 3. A neat little trick people will do is to have their support who's coming back from the fountain TP straight to mid lane, and then the mid laner will give them their bottle. Since the fountain effect lingers for a brief time after leaving, this acts as a bottle refill. You can also share the bottle effects and give teammates bottles with no problem at all. This is useful for seed money support Alec just giving his mid laner a bottle off rip. And by bottling up a power rune, you save it for a more convenient time. Fairy Fire is a cheap outplay tool usually purchased by mid laners. Unlike other consumables, this item actually gives you some stats, namely a bit of extra damage. You can choose to consume the item to heal yourself for about an auto attack's worth of health. This does have a cooldown though, so you can't just scarf them down to gain a lot of HP. It's an outplay tool because using it at the right time can give you just enough health to win a duel. The extra damage is also nice. The Enchanted Mango is a pretty simple item. Like the Fairy Fire, it gives you some stats in the form of extra health regen. You can consume a mango to instantly gain some mana, and unlike Fairy Fire, this doesn't have a cooldown, so you can chuck mangoes down your throat like me during a hot summer day. Also, these stack up to 3 times per item slot and can be a cheap source of instant mana when you need it. The Town Portal Scroll, aka the TP Scroll, is the actual best item in Dota. These lets you teleport to a nearby allied structure of your choice. These babies have a global cast range, and you get one for free upon getting killed by an enemy hero. Like neutral items, you also have a dedicated item slot just for TP Scrolls, and you can use them as long as they're off cooldown. However, using it puts you in a vulnerable channeling state though, and interrupting effects like roots, leashes, and stunts will break the channel. This also consumes the item. Use it to defend towers, counter dives, and to simply traverse the map. Raindrops are an item that I feel a lot of people simply don't buy enough. It's highly slept on and worth the relatively high gold cost compared to the other consumables. Raindrops actually start off on a timer and aren't available for purchase when the game starts, but when you can buy them, they're usually pretty dang good. First off, they're a consumable that provides a very useful stat, especially in the early game, which is mana regen. The catch is, you don't have a say in when they get used up. Instead of chugging them down like an addict, raindrops act as a defensive consumable by blocking a set amount of magic damage from instances over a certain threshold. This is a passive effect that is always on, and you don't have to do anything to block the extra spell damage as long as it's off cooldown. You get 6 uses of this effect, and when they're used up, the raindrop pops and disappears. This is a very powerful item that gets skipped a lot. It's a cheap source of spell mitigation, and it also gives you some nice mana regen. Buy it more often, especially against magic heavy early game lineups. Aghanim Shard is an item that can only be purchased after a set time has passed. It grants no stats on its own, but when you buy it, it does provide your hero with a unique upgrade. Shard also gets given to one of the 2 lowest net worth players within your team that don't already have a shard purchased whenever your team kills a Tormentor. An Iron Branch is the most gold efficient item in the game. For 50 gold, this item gives you +1 to every attribute, meaning your strength, agility, and intelligence. It's a very trusty early game item, and you'll usually want to buy 2 or 3 at the start of the game if you're a core. It's consumable because you can use it to plant a tree at a target location. This can be helpful for certain heroes, but the range is a bit of a limitation. Most people will just make the tree and then immediately tango it. By doing so, you get double the tango's normal duration, effectively giving you a 4th tango. So a lot of items in Dota are actually just components to the bigger items. Note that I'm mainly going to be following Valve's separation of items, but I will make a few changes based on gut feel. For example, Valve lists Parasma as a support item, which is pretty stupid. Anyway, I'm just going to blitz through most of these components since they just give raw stats, and there's not much I really want to say about them. Attribute items are just items that add to your strength, agility, or intelligence stats, or all of them at the same time, because they grant attributes which translates to multiple stats, and not just the raw stats themselves. They're pretty gold efficient and get you a lot of value per purchase. For strength items, you get the Gauntlets of Strength, the Belt of Strength, and the Ogre Axe. For agility items, you get the Slippers of Agility, Band of Elven Skin, and Blade of Alacrity. For intelligence items, you get the Mantle of Intelligence, Robe of the Magi, and Staff of Wizardry. And for all stats items, you get the Circlet, the Crown, and the Diadem. None of these are particularly exciting except for the Mantle of Intelligence, which you can drop in the enemy base when you're about to win as a form of BM. Equipment items are items that only really benefit when you're in combat by giving you benefits to things like your attack speed, attack damage, and armor. For armor options, you have the Ring of Protection, the Chainmail, and the Helm of Iron Will, which does also give you some health regen, which is quite nice as well. For attack speed, you get the Gloves of Haste and the Blitz Knuckles, and for attack damage, you get the Blades of Attack, Broadsword, Claymore, and Mithril Hammer. Miscellaneous items are items that give you mainly out of combat benefits, such as more regen, more health, and cloaks here too for some reason. So that's the Ring of Regen, Sage's Mask, Fluffy Hat, Ring of Health, Void Stone, and of course, the Cloak. Secret shop items are special items that are generally more expensive than most others and can only be purchased at either team's secret shop. So we got the Ring of Tarask, the Tiara of Salamene, the Energy Booster, Vitality Booster, Point Booster, Cornucopia, Talisman of Evasion, Plate Mail, Hyperstone, Demon Edge, Eagle Song, Mystic Staff, Reaver, Ultimate Orb, and finally, Sacred Relic. Unique items aren't a real classification according to Valve, but it just feels weird to see them classified with the rest of the components, and it would be disingenuous of me to just breeze over them. Quelling Blade is a special item usually purchased in the laning phase. This gives you more attack damage against non-hero units, but you get more damage if you're a melee hero. This makes it easier to last hit creeps in lane, giving you a lot of extra damage against creeps for not a lot of gold. It also has an active that lets you immediately cut down a tree, making it a must-buy item against heroes like Nature's Prophet and Treant Protector. The Orb of Venom doesn't give stats on its own, but it does make all of your auto attacks apply a weak damage over time effect while also applying a slow. The slowing effect is stronger when used by melee heroes. And this is an item usually bought by active ganking melee supports like Bounty Hunter, Spirit Breaker, and Earth Spirit. Blightstone is another attack modifier that makes your auto attacks apply a weak minus armor debuff. It's generally purchased by heroes that want to deal a ton of physical damage and buy it to eventually upgrade into a Desolator like Phantom Assassin. It's pretty decent in a kill lane since it increases the damage a target takes from all autos and not just your own. Magic Stick is an investment item. It doesn't give you any stats off rip, but it gains charges every single time a nearby enemy casts a spell. It gains up to 10 charges on its own, and you can consume the charges to instantly regain some health and mana per charge when consumed. With how many spells are used in lane, this can get you a ton of charges fast. A fully stacked stick can be a huge tide turner in an early game fight. It's a good investment in most lanes, but is an absolute must buy against spell spammers like Batrider, Bristleback, and Phantom Assassin. Note that it only grants charges if you see the enemy casting the spell, so clever enemies will try to cast spells from fog if they can. Morbid Mask is typically a carry only item unless you're aura stacking. This gives you lifesteal on your attacks, healing you for a percentage of the damage dealt. You heal less when hitting creeps though. Voodoo Mask is Morbid Mask but for spells. Javelin serves as our introduction to proc items. When you have a Javelin, 1/4 of your attacks will simply ignore enemy evasion mechanics and just hit and deal extra damage. I know that buying multiple Javelins increases your odds, but I don't want to get into the math. Shadow Amulet is a special item that has a fairly unique active. You can use it on an allied hero or yourself to grant a very brief invisibility buff. However, it doesn't last very long and it slows the target so you can grief a teammate with it if you're not careful. Use it in the middle of combat to mess with an enemy's vision or as an outplay tool in very niche situations. It's mainly a component for better items later on though. Ghost Scepter is a defensive tool that is mainly used to keep yourself alive against right clickers. It gives some nice all stats, but the active makes you immune to physical damage. However, in this state you also take extra magic damage, so be careful when using it in the vicinity of heroes like Lina and Leshrac. The Gem of True Sight is a high risk, high reward item. On one hand, holding it grants you the True Sight effect, allowing your hero to see invisible units and wards, making it a powerful vision control tool. It also has an active that reveals invisible units in an area, which is mainly used for dewarding uphill. On the other hand, this gem is dropped upon death, free for either team to pick up. Typically, this item is held by one of the team's more durable members since the True Sight is granted in a radius around the wearer, but it's not unheard of to keep it on a support either. Blink Dagger is one of the things that makes Dota, well, Dota. This item gives no stats on its own, but has single-handedly won many different games. When you use this item, you can instantly teleport to a location up to a set distance. If you target a location that's past this item's cast range, you instead get teleported to a bit below max range. To never have this happen to you again ever, simply hold Alt and then right click on Blink. If you still overblink, you're trash, a disappointment to your ancestors, and you should uninstall immediately. Note that upon taking hero-based damage from an enemy source, the active is disabled for a few seconds, so it's mainly an engage tool and is generally unreliable as an escape. A lot of heroes live and die by the Blink Dagger, namely big teamfight initiators like Earthshaker and Magnus. However, the active is so good that you can honestly justify Blink on almost any hero except for the likes of Anti-Mage, Queen of Pain, Riki, and Phantom Assassin. Windlace just gives a flat move speed buff. It doesn't stack with itself either, nor other items that need Windlace to be built. Boots of Speed are your typical brown boots that give you a flat move speed boost. Just like Windlace, the move speed bonus from boots and its respective upgrades, which we'll get into later, do not stack. And with components and consumables out of the way, let's get into the stuff that's actually fun. Bracer is an early game tankiness stat stick. It gives you a decent chunk of strength, some raw health and health regen, in addition to some extra agi and intelligence. It's a nice item to have for strength cores and supports that just need to tank up a bit. This item, along with its agi and int counterparts, has the unique property of doubling the stats it gives after 25 minutes. This makes them a very good early game investment if you end up not selling them until much later on. Wraithband is the agility early game item. This item gives you a bit of every stat, but mostly in agility. It also gives attack speed and armor, and it's nice for agility cores, but it's also pretty decent on universal supports that need the extra armor and attack speed to win trades. Null Talisman is the intelligence version of the last two items. It gives the same stat spread as Wraithband and Bracer, except it focuses on intelligence instead. It gives some extra max mana capacity and mana regen. It's usually purchased on casters, but honestly Null's pretty good for anyone who could use the extra mana. I've seen it bought on heroes like Chaos Knight, Drow, Omni Knight, and other unconventional Null buyers. This item and its two other counterparts are purchased because of how much value you get out of having them early on for such a relatively cheap upfront cost. Magic Wand is your upgrade to Magic Stick. It gives you some extra all stats and doubles your wand charge capacity. Generally, it's good on every hero, but is a must buy into certain matchups. Soul Ring is an interesting item that lets you convert some of your health to mana. This is generally used by spell spammers that have the means to offset the health cost. Bane, Undying, and Omni Knight, for example. Orb of Corrosion is an upgrade to Orb of Venom, and it gives some extra armor and attack speed, which is great for skirmishing. It also makes the attack effect of Orb of Venom deal more damage, while also making you reduce enemy regen ever so slightly. Falcon Blade is a mana regen sustain tool for carries. It gives damage, mana regen, and a bit of health too. It's an early game item for carries that need a mana to spam their spells, like Weaver, Clinks, Gyro, and Drow Ranger. It's a dead end item though with no upgrade path, so keep that in mind. Perseverance is a regen stat stick and is usually bought as a component for bigger items we'll get to later on. Oblivion Staff is also another stat stick that's just a bigger component for a stronger item later on. This is usually bought by int carries or mid laners like Queen of Pain, Merita, and Silencer. It gives some pretty decent stats for someone who wants to auto attack and spam spells. Mask of Madness is a very risky item because the active reduces your armor and silences you for a short time. In turn, you also gain an attack speed and move speed boost. This item is usually bought on right-clickers that don't care about the downside and could benefit from the boost. Sven's War Cry alleviates the minus armor penalty and doesn't really mind being silenced once he uses his stun. And Faceless Void doesn't really care about either when the entire enemy team is chronoed anyway. Just remember to pop the Mask of Madness before your big spells, otherwise you go straight to low priority. Hand of Midas is the greedy bitch item. This item gives you a good chunk of attack speed and allows you to convert a creep into a bunch of gold with an increased experience bounty. You can bank up to 2 charges of this ability and generally want to get a Midas as early as possible. It starts paying for itself after about 14 uses. It also guarantees a neutral item drop when used on a neutral creep if used on one, so don't discount it. Interestingly, gold gained from Midas is also reliable gold, so you won't lose it on death. Generally, Midas is nice when you're ahead. It's usually bought on carries, but other people can get it too if the game looks like it'll go late. In addition to the stats it gives, Helm of the Dominator lets you dominate a target creep and place it under your control. The dominated creep gets a bunch of bonuses like extra move speed, regen, attack damage, and armor. The creep will also have an increased bounty set to it, so you need to be careful to not let it die. It's a purchase for heroes that have benefits to controlled units like Chen and Lycan. As the name implies, support items are usually bought by supports and they're just there to help your team. Technically anybody can build them, but you'll most commonly see them in the inventories of POS 4 and 5 heroes. Buckler is a pretty simple item. It gives you some armor on its own, but also gives you an armor aura, giving you extra armor for nearby teammates. It's usually just a component for bigger items later on. Headdress is pretty much the same as Buckler, except it gives regen instead of armor. It's nice to have early on because it helps you with your trades, but it can mess with a wave state, so be prepared to do a lot more pulling. Ring of Basilius is the same as above two, but it gives mana regen instead. It's also an arcane boots component and has a pretty decent build-up. Unlike Buckler and Headdress, however, Bassi doesn't push the wave. It's typically bought early on by supports, so they have the mana to spam spells in lane. Urn of Shadows is a very interesting item that has a unique mechanic of collecting charges every time an enemy hero dies within the vicinity. These charges can then be used to either heal allies or damage enemies, but the healing effect on allies is dispelled upon taking damage, much like a salve. The item starts with no charges, but when gaining a charge from 0, you get 2 charges instead of just 1, and when you die with no charges, you're also given a pity charge when you respawn. If there are multiple urns on a team, the one that is closest to the enemy hero when they die gets the charge. This should never happen though, so you should always coordinate who buys urn, or just announce that you're buying it before the game begins. Spirit Festival's Urn's upgrade. It has a stronger heal effect when used on allies, while also reducing enemy healing effects when used on them. It's one of the few sources of anti-heal in the game, and is a must-buy against heroes like Alchemists, who rely on healing and regen to stay alive. Pavis is a pretty useful item to have in general. It gives some nice durability stats, and it also lets you put a physical barrier on an ally or yourself to block incoming physical damage. It's a great item most of the time, unless you're up against a team that's purely magical. Otherwise, pick it up against physical burst heroes like Templar Assassin, Phantom Assassin, and Slardar. Solar Crest is an upgrade to Pavis that doubles the barrier strength while also giving armor, attack speed, and move speed to the target ally. You can still use it on yourself for the barrier, but that doesn't give you the other stats, so you should almost always be using it on your carry for the extra value. Drum of Endurance is a support item that's mainly used in a team fight or when pushing. In addition to the stats it gives, it also grants you a move speed aura. It also has an active that gives every allied unit around you some attack speed and even more move speed for a short time. You don't really notice the effect during a clash, but it can be game winning. It functions on a charge basis, and once you're out of charges, you can no longer use the active. However, you can buy the recipe again to regain the charges. While it is a support item, some cores can buy this item too. Razor's not a bad drums carrier because it gives him even more move speed and tankiness, and the active lets him deal more damage too. Gyrocopter can also buy drums and sell and rebuy the recipe at no additional cost to refresh his charges. Vladimir's Offering is an aura item that every carry loves to have but never wants to buy themselves. It grants the holder an aura that gives nearby teammates lifesteal, extra damage, mana regen, and armor. If you can make the space for it in your build, your carry will actually love you. Because it's an aura item, it works best in deathball lineups. Mechanism is the prototypical support item. Popping it just heals all allied units around you and grants a health regen bonus. Once used, affected teammates cannot be affected by another mechanism until yours has properly cooled down. This means that you can't just spam mechs and cheese wins like that. This item is typically reserved for defensive supports, but it does have a useful upgrade later on that we'll talk about later. Holy Locket is an upgrade to the magic wand that most people won't get. It's mainly used by healing supports like Io and Omni Knight, and for good reason. Interestingly, Locket gains charges just like the magic wand, but it also passively gains a charge every few seconds, meaning that you don't have to be in combat to gain charges. You also heal more per charge, and you can also heal allies with your charges now too. It also buffs all heals you provide, making it a great buy for supports with innate healing in their kits. Pipe of Insight is the team-wide anti-magic item. In addition to the stats it gives, it also provides a magic resistance aura and an active that grants all nearby allies a magic damage barrier for a set amount of time. A must-build item against heroes like Leshrac and Sand King to hamper their effectiveness. The item is a bit more expensive than the other support items, so it's usually built by the offlaner, as they'll usually have the goal to get it as a reasonable timing. But if you're a support looking for a way to deal with magic damage, you might want to consider Glimmer Cape is a saving item that lets you protect a single teammate with a magic damage barrier, some extra move speed, and invisibility. It's generally a good item to buy as a support even when you're not facing any imminent magic damage threats. Force Staff is one of the most useful items in the entire game. It lets you push a target unit, enemy, or ally in the direction they are facing. Use it on yourself for a quick getaway, on an ally as a save, or on the enemy to mess with their positioning. These items are typically purchased by spellcasters to enhance their casting prowess, or by select heroes for their helpful active. Veil of Discord gives pretty decent tanking stats, but also has a useful active that causes nearby enemy heroes to take bonus spell damage. This item is best used by heroes that go into the fight rather than backline casters though. Ether Lens increases your cast range for all abilities and items, which is absolutely amazing. Combined with the Ghost Scepter, you get the Ethereal Blade. This allows you to shoot out a projectile on an enemy or ally to make them ethereal, shielding them from physical damage while increasing the magic damage they take. It's very fun on burst damage spellcasters like Lina. Simply E-Blade a target and then unload your full combo on them. Rod of Athos is an offensive item, and using it shoots out a projectile that immobilizes the target enemy. It's great in tandem with hard-to-land abilities like Mirana's Arrow or Skywrath Mage's ultimate. Yule's Scepter of Divinity, or simply just Yule's, is a tool that lets you spin a target enemy hero or yourself up into the air. When used, the target is invulnerable and is applied to Dispel, meaning you remove negative effects like silences and certain slows from yourself while removing positive effects from the enemy. Enemies also take a bit of damage upon landing. Use this as a setup tool for hard-to-land abilities abilities like Leshrak's Stun or Mars' Spear, or as a survivability tool to remove silences from heroes like Storm Spirit and Puck. Buy it against Spirit Breaker to remove his annoying bulldoze. Seriously, fuck that guy. Wind Waker is the upgrade to Yule's, letting you target allies as well, making it a powerful save tool. It also allows you to move while casting it on yourself, allowing you to exit certain effects like Puck's Dream Coil or Mars' Arena without a hitch. It's an incredibly powerful item denoted by its price tag. In its current iteration, it's the single most expensive item in the game, if I'm not mistaken. Witchblade is a tool mainly used by int carriers and mid laners like Silencer and Puck. In addition to giving helpful stats like attack speed and intelligence, it's also the only purchasable item in the game to buff the projectile speed of ranged heroes, along with its upgrade. It also has a passive component that, when ready, causes your next auto attack to apply a debuff that slows and deals damage over time based on your intelligence stat. This effect also has True Strike, meaning it can never miss from evasion. Parasma is the upgrade to Witchblade that introduces a new passive that causes your attacks to reduce enemy magic resistance. Dagon grants all stats and some spell lifesteal, but you're mainly getting it for the active. This lets you deal a burst of magic damage to a target unit, and when used this way, it also heals you for a portion of the damage dealt. This effect can be upgraded by buying the recipe again to increase the stats it gives, as well as the damage the active deals. And the active also insta-kills non-hero units as long as they're not ancient creeps nor siege creeps. It's mostly looked at as a meme by the community, but certain mid laners can make use of the active pretty well, namely Queen of Pain and Keeper of the Light. Orchid Malevolence is an item used by certain cores and sometimes supports to silence an enemy, thus limiting their counterplay options. Heroes that go for this item are usually gankers that try to get active around the map early. Clinks, Queen of Pain, and Nature's Prophet are some examples of classic Orchid buyers, but carries have started to buy this item with an idea of upgrading it later. Note that a portion of all damage that a target takes during the silence duration will be dealt again once the debuff expires. Aghanim Scepter, like Aghanim Shard, gives your hero a unique upgrade. This usually takes the form of upgrading an existing spell or giving you a new one entirely. Scepter upgrades are unique to each hero, thus when to buy it depends entirely on who you're playing and who you're playing against. You can spend a bit of extra money to buy the Aghanim's Blessing to consume your scepter and gain the upgrade without having to take an inventory slot. Note that when you do this, you lose out on the raw stats from an item itself, so don't buy it too early. Octarine Core is a very expensive stat stick that grants you cooldown reduction. It's a luxury item and usually reserved for casters, but certain carriers can also make use of the CDR aspect of this ability. Typically though, you'll want to reserve it for heroes like Warlock and Enigma who want their ultimates to be up consistently. Late game, most spellcasters can make use of the CDR too. Refresher Orb instantly resets the cooldown of most abilities and items. It is an absolute game changer of an item that can completely change the outlook of a match. Heroes that want to get it are usually the ones that have powerful ultimates that take forever to come back, so they're able to use them twice in a fight. Tidehunter, Enigma, Warlock, and even Faceless Void are all viable Refresher Orb builders. Note that this item's cooldown does not tick down when moved to the backpack slot, so you have to commit to keeping it in your inventory. Scythe of Vice gives you a point-and-click hex. You polymorph an enemy, lowering their base move speed, silencing them, muting them, and disarming them, and probably dooming them to a chain stun into death true combo. It's a crazy strong item on anyone and always worth considering, especially against pesky mobile heroes. Armor items are typically defensive options that let you live longer in a fight. Vanguard is an early game tanking item that gives you a chance to block incoming damage from attacks. The damage blocked is higher on melee heroes. Crimson Guard is Vanguard's older brother that keeps the passive effect but can be activated to grant the damage block effect to all nearby allied heroes and buildings. This damage blocked effect scales based on your max HP and reduces a portion of all damage affected units take from each incoming attack. It's a decent buy against physical damage lineups, but it really shines as a counter to illusion heroes like Phantom Lancer and Terror Blade. Blade Mail gives you some armor and damage while also causing you to passively return a portion of all damage you take from attacks. This item can also be activated to cause you to reflect a much larger portion of damage you take from all sources, including spells. Typical Blade Mail buyers are heroes like Centaur and Axe that want to be in the thick of a fight. Aeon Disc is the Dota equivalent of Monopoly's get out of jail free card. Upon taking player-based damage that would cause your health to fall below a certain threshold, you gain a powerful bubble. This bubble causes you to take and deal no damage for a short time, but it also empowers you, applying a strong dispel and boosting your status resistance as well. It's a bailout tool that ensures you don't get insta-deleted every fight. It's usually reserved for supports, but cores can also get it depending on the game and the general meta. It has a pretty lengthy cooldown for the effect, and it gets longer with every use up until a certain point. Soul Booster is another stat stick. You're only really buying it with the intention of upgrading it later. Eternal Shroud is a powerful anti-magic item. It grants you stacking magic res every time you take a certain amount of spell damage. You also regenerate mana equal to a portion of spell damage you take. take. Lotus Orb is a defensive utility tool that allows you to purge debuffs from your teammates and yourself, which I would argue is the main benefit of this item. However, it also grants your target teammate a special Echo Shell that causes all targeted effects to be reflected back at their caster. Note that this merely reflects the spell, not nullifies it. This means that a Doom ulting a Lotus Orb target still dooms his main target at the cost of dooming himself. If you want to block spells outright, you're gonna want Lincoln Sphere blocks a single targeted spell or effect and then goes on cooldown. You can use this on a teammate to transfer the spell block effect to them. Black King Bar, or simply BKB, is one of Dota's defining items and is your I get to play the game button. Simply put, it gives your hero a resistance to most debuffs such as stuns from basic abilities and the like, while also giving you a pretty good chunk of magic resistance while active. Typically, it's built by carries, particularly melee ones, but almost anyone can buy it and it would be justifiable. The effect is incredibly powerful, but it also weakens as the game goes on. The duration of your debuff immunity goes down to as low as 6 seconds in its current state. This is not a lot considering how long fights go in Dota. However, it is not an invulnerability button. Certain spells go right through BKB, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get it. It's still a really good item to have. Bloodstone is a sustain item for casters. It gives great stats, including a unique AoE bonus stat, as well as an active that increases the spell lifesteal drastically for a short amount of time. There are a lot of heroes over the years that have built Bloodstone like Bristleback and Razor, but I can't mention it without mentioning Leshrac. These two go hand in hand with each other. Assault Cuirass is the very definition of a luxury item. These are the items that are nice to have but don't really make or break a hero like BKB, Blink Dagger, or the like. You should only really get it though once your core items have been acquired. The main benefit of Assault Cuirass is the fact that it gives an attack speed and armor bonus to nearby friendly units as an aura. This makes it great for pushing and in a team fight. Shiva's Guard is honestly a pretty overloaded item. Despite the nerfs, it's still really good. In addition to the really nice stats that it also has a passive effect that reduces enemy attack speed and healing effects. It also has an active that slows movement, amps damage, and even deals damage itself. This item just does way too much, and while it's here, you should abuse it as much as you can. It's great on most frontliners or as an anti-heal option. Heart of Tarask is the endgame strength item. It gives 2 stats, Flak Strength, and regen based on your max HP. Get it on heroes like Centaur and Pudge for the raw stat stacking synergy, or on Warlock for synergy with your facet. Generally though, it's good for if you just want to be hard to kill. And Helm of the Overlord is just an all-around upgrade to Helm of the Dominator, but also lets you target ancient creeps too. Weapons are items that help improve your general damage output by giving you the raw stats and certain effects. Crystallis gives you damage and a passive chance to crit on your auto attacks. On its own, it's already pretty nice, but you're usually going to upgrade this into. Daedalus is literally just Crystallis but better. It gives more damage and has a bigger crit. Armlet of Mordigian, or simply just Armlet, is a very interesting high risk, high reward item, much like Mask of Madness. On its own, Armlet gives pretty decent stats for a fighter, but when activated, it grants damage, strength, and armor at the cost of draining health every second. Thus, this item is usually purchased by strength heroes as it gives crazy damage when turned on for such a cheap cost. Armlet buyers usually have a way to compensate the health loss. Huskar and DK have great regen thanks to their skills. Alchemist's alt regen mostly offsets the health drain as well. Lifestealer just lifesteals it because that's what he does, and same goes for Chaos Knight and Wraith King. Skullbasher gives your auto attacks a chance to stun an enemy. The bash chance is lower for ranged heroes, so it's typically bought by melee heroes only. Important to note that the bash goes through BKB. And note that if your hero already has a form of bash in their kit like Faceless Void, Slardar, or Spirit Breaker, they are not able to purchase this item nor its upgrade. Abyssal Blade is Basher's big bad brother, letting you stun a nearby target at will while still retaining the chance to proc a stun with your autos. Since it also incorporates Vanguard into its build path, you also get the damage block passive from that too. Shadow Blade gives you damage and attack speed but also lets you turn invisible at will. While invisible, you gain phase move speed and move a bit faster. Attacking, casting a spell, or using an item will typically break the invisibility, but if you break the invis with an auto attack, you deal bonus physical damage for that strike. It's usually better in lower ranked games because people refuse to buy detection, but it's a pretty decent early game option for heroes like Dragon Knight to let them impact the map and roam while still giving stats. Buying it also makes your opponents respect your invis, forcing their supports to buy dust and sentries to deal with you, hurting their economy. Not a lot of heroes naturally build Shadow Blade, but Slark is one of them. Silver Edge is Shadow Blade's upgrade. In addition to just being a better version of the item, it also makes the invis attack apply the break effect on an enemy, disabling most passive abilities. It's a must-have against heroes like Spectre and Bristleback who heavily rely on their passives to stay alive. And unless you're against those heroes, you're usually not going to be rushing this item. There's just better options out there for your money. Desolator is Blightstone but better. In addition to the damage it gives, you also get the corruption effect on your auto attacks, causing them to apply a minus armor debuff on opponents. And when an enemy hero dies while affected by this debuff, you also permanently gain a bit of bonus damage tied to the the item. Battle Fury is a fun farming item for heroes like Anti-Mage, Ursa, and Troll Warlord. This makes your attacks cleave in an area around them, allowing them to affect multiple enemies. The melee carries who get this tend to just want to farm really fast. The cleave effect lets you clear waves and camps with ease, particularly on heroes that lack innate wave clear. It also provides a bit of regen, which should be enough to sustain you for farming, and is typically your first big item because by getting it first, you speed up the time it takes to get your next ones. Nullifier is the delete the support button. Use this to apply a debuff to a target enemy, slowing them and applying a continuous dispel, purging effects on them like Yule's, Ghost Scepter, Aeon Disc, and even Force Staff's push. It is a situational item that you only want to buy if your enemy's items are causing you trouble. Monkey King Bar, or simply MKB, is an item that gives you some raw DPS stats. But it also has an amped up version of Javelin's passive, giving your attacks a much bigger chance to ignore evasion checks while also dealing more damage from the proc. Buy this against heroes that mess up with your hit chance like PA, Riki, Troll Warlord, and Phoenix. Radiance is an item that gives you a damage aura that also partially blinds afflicted enemies. Note that while this effect is copied by your illusions, they do deal less damage with it. Radiance is typically bought as a farm acceleration item, but it's good for heroes that have the longevity in fights as the burn damage adds up over time. Alchemist is usually the hero people have in mind when they think about Radiance. You can also turn it off to not give away the fact that you're nearby. Revenant's Brooch is an item that gives some damage and lifesteal, and while activated causes your attacks to deal magic damage and be able to hit ethereal units. This is at the cost of some mana every strike, and while it's active, you cannot crit. This item is incredibly niche, but it's good to catch an enemy armor stacker off guard. It's also great against heroes like Necrophos, Pugna, and ironically, Muerta. Butterfly is the pinnacle of agility items. This is literally a stat stick, but it also gives a decent chunk of evasion and speeds up your attacks. If you're playing an agi carry and in need of a luxury item, Butterfly should always be up for consideration. Bloodthorn is Orchid's much more evil upgrade. This gives better raw stats and a souped up version of Orchid active. It still silences the main target, but also makes all attacks on them deal additional damage. Additionally, all attacks on the target ignore evasion checks. It also incorporates Javelin's passive. Divine Rapier is the craziest item in the game. It gives a huge amount of raw damage and can be toggled to give Hella Spell Amp instead, which is nice for casters. However, if you die while carrying it, the item is dropped on death, free for anyone to pick up, like Gem of True Sight. Note that if an ally picks up your rapier, they can return it to you for free. In fact, they should because they get nothing from the item itself as it's still bound to you. However, should an enemy pick up the rapier, you're gonna have to kill him to get it back. Buy this item if you like your Dota match with a little bit of extra spice in it. There are also certain heroes that are naturally good rapier carriers. Wraith King has 2 lives, so that's quite nice. Gyrocopter, Ember Spirit, Kunkka, Sven, and Medusa have the capability to deal damage to multiple heroes with their auto attacks, so they're quite good with it too. Zeus is probably the best holder of the spell amp version because he's usually way in the back and free from any danger, and PA has the beefiest crit in the game and can get pretty crazy with it. Artifacts are special items that grant unique effects and are generally good items throughout all the stages in the game. Sange is the strength attribute sword. On its own, it grants some strength, slow resistance, and healing amplification. It can also be combined with either the agility attribute swords or the intelligence attribute swords, but on its own, it can also be upgraded into. Heaven's Halberd is an item that allows you to disarm a target enemy. This means they cannot attack, but the effect lasts longer on ranged heroes. It also gives you some evasion, which is quite nice too. Yasha is the agility attribute sword. This one gives you some attack speed and move speed, and is commonly upgraded into. Manta Style is an item that lets you create 2 illusions of your hero, but the real meat and potatoes is that using it dispels debuffs from your person like silences and certain slows. It's a nice defensive option, but certain heroes will also want to get it for synergies with their own kit. Anti-Mage Illusions get the mana burn effect from his Q, illusion heroes like PL, CK, TB, and Naga would appreciate having even more clones, and Spectre Illusions can also proc or desolate on isolated enemies. Kaya is the intelligence attribute sword. This one grants spell amp, which boosts spell damage, as well as amplifying your mana regen and spell lifesteal effects. You'll sometimes see it upgraded into. Meteor Hammer is a very weird item. It has an active effect that causes you to channel a falling meteor at a target location. Upon the meteor's landing, targets are stunned and take some impact damage and some damage over time for a few seconds. On units, this also applies a slow. This effect does affect buildings, letting spellcasters that would normally be ineffective at killing towers be able to contribute at least a little bit in that area if they choose to build such an item. Certain heroes also combo well with it. OD can set up the channel with his prison, Naga Siren can as well with his song, Phoenix can channel the meteor during his dive, and Treant Protector can infamously clear waves with it. It's a bit awkward, but it has its uses. Sange's Yasha is built when combining the 2 swords, and you gain the effects of both as well as some extra status resistance, reducing the duration of debuffs on you. This is commonly bought on melee heroes like Sven and the pseudo-melee Troll Warlord to keep themselves from getting kited for too long. Yasha and Kaya is built when combining the 2 swords. In addition to the normal stats they give, it also increases the holder's cast speed. This is great for heroes with notoriously long cast animations, but the most obvious synergy goes to Shadow Fiend, as he can seemingly make use of every single stat this item gives. Kaya and Sanj is the last of the sword combos, and it grants the unique stat of reducing mana cost and mana loss. This reduces the potency of things like AM's mana burn and Lion's mana drain, but honestly in comparison to the other two, this one kinda sucks. Dragon Lance boosts the wearer's attack range if they're a ranged hero, and it's nice on heroes like Sniper, Drow, and Enchantress. Hurricane Pike is an upgrade to both Dragon Lance and Force Staff. This beefs up the stats that the items give, but also changes the active. When targeting yourself and allies, it acts the same as Force Staff, but when used on an enemy, it shoves you both away in opposite directions while giving you a few attacks on them with limitless range. It's nice to have if you're getting gone on a lot as a ranged carry. Phylactery causes your next unit target spell to also deal some extra damage, as well as slow the target for a brief moment. People who buy this item are usually those with spammable single target spells. Some examples include Rubik, Bane, Zeus, and even Sniper. It also upgrades into Conda is an alternate path to Chrysalis. It provides a passive critical strike that it does, but also buffs the phylactery effect, causing it to deal even more damage based on your attack damage. It's great on certain cores with spammable spells, like Morphling. Diffusal Blade is an item that turns anyone who buys it into a budget anti-mage. This causes all your attacks to burn mana, and has an active that allows you to apply Decaying Slow. Your attacks will also deal extra damage based on the mana burned. It's an affordable carry item that allows certain cores to get active early on in the game, like Riki, Naga, and Slark. These days, it's a pretty great Meepo item too. Disperser is the upgraded Diffusal Blade. It's mostly the same item with better stats, but you are now able to target yourself or allies. When used on a friendly, the target gains increased move speed and is purged of debuffs. Echo Saber is kinda like Diffusal in the sense that it's not a very expensive item meant for carries, but it's mainly used for strength cores and has a completely different effect. It causes your next auto attack every few seconds to double hit with a second hit, applying a brief slow. It's usually purchased by strength cores that hit hard, but not really fast. Tiny, Sven, and Wraith King are some examples of typical Echo Saber buyers. Harpoon is the upgrade to Echo Saber. It retains the double hit passive, but it also has an active that can be used to pull yourself and your target enemy to the midpoint so you can start whacking them. Kinda like Chaos Knight's Rift or Nautilus's Hook from League. As the usual upgrade to Echo Saber, it's bought by anyone who gets it after a certain point, but a special mention goes to Magnus, who uses it to kidnap people. Mage Slayer is an anti-caster item. This causes your attacks to apply a debuff to enemy units, causing them to take damage over time and reduce their outgoing spell damage. It's typically bought against certain heroes like Leshrac and Viper, but you can also buy it on heroes like Ember Spirit who can easily apply the effect on different targets. Satanic is the epitome of lifesteal items. It grants a lot of lifesteal on its own, but popping the active gives you a ton more lifesteal, allowing carriers to heal themselves back up to full quite easily. It also applies a Dispel. This is typically bought by any carry that could use the sustain or the active for either the healing or the cleanse. Eye of Scotty is an item that causes your attacks to apply a slow and reduce healing. The slow is stronger when applied on ranged heroes. When do you purchase Eye of Skibbity? It's when you're in need of raw stats on a hero like Meepo or Medusa, or if you just need the anti-heal against a regen hero. Moon Shard is an item that gives you hella attack speed and a night vision bonus. It also has the unique effect of being consumed, allowing you to gain half the item stat bonuses passively. This item is usually reserved for ultra late games so you can consume it when you're already 6 slotted. However, there are a few heroes that can abuse that raw attack speed like Odie and Sven. It's highly situational though, since other items tend to provide a lot more value. Maelstrom is a cheap item bought by fast attackers or farming carries. It gives your attacks a chance to passively create a chain lightning that bounces across nearby units, damaging them. Mjolnir is a more carry-oriented upgrade to Maelstrom, giving you a ton more attack speed while giving you a lightning cloak. When attacked with a cloak on, you have a chance to shock the target with a lightning bolt, much like the passive effect. Gleipnir is the more utility-oriented upgrade to Maelstrom, requiring Rod of Atos. You can cast this in the target area to send out projectiles at all enemies within. Enemies hit by these projectiles are damaged and rooted, but this effect can be blocked by Linken's or reflected by Lotus Orb. Overwhelming Blink is the strength upgrade path to Blink Dagger. When you cast it, you deal damage to all enemies around you at the point of arrival based on your strength, while also applying a slow to enemy move and attack speed. It's a great late game purchase for heroes like Centaur and Pudge. However, personally, I don't get Strength Blink on Axe in the ultra late game because you want your enemies to hit you faster for your spin to proc more, but the effect slows attack speed, so I usually get the Int Blink, which we'll talk about later. Swift Blink is your agility centered Blink Dagger. After blinking to an area, you gain a buff to your agility and your move speed, while also being able to run through units. This item is purchased almost exclusively on carries, usually agi carries like Jug and Templar Assassin, but it's not unheard of to buy it on strength carries that want to hit faster like Sven and Wraith King. Arcane Blink is the Intelligence Blink Dagger upgrade. It has a lower cooldown and higher cast range than the regular Blink Dagger and other variants, and when used, it also heals the user's HP and mana. It's the least used variant by far, but it's the upgrade choice for backline casters like Tinker and Rubik. Puck also gets a lot of use out of it because it makes them even more slippery. These are your upgrades to your boots to make them do even more than just give you extra movement speed. Note that move speed bonuses for multiple boots do not stack. Power treads are your typical carry boots. In addition to attack speed, they give you extra strength, agility, and intelligence depending on which one you toggle on. The toggle has no cooldown, and more skilled players will switch to the version of treads that will be more useful in the current situation. The most common is switching to int right before casting a spell, then switching back to your version of choice. This saves you a bit of extra mana, but it does add up. Also, you don't have to use Belt of Giant Strength to make the item. This can be substituted with either Robe of the Magi or Band of Elven Skin. Phase boots are usually purchased more by offlaners than carries. They give you a bit of extra armor, but can also be activated to give you a burst of movement speed. It's great for catching up to enemies and staying on top of them for spell effects. Axe and Primal Beast are a couple of heroes that can utilize both the stats and the active quite effectively. Boots of Travel is an investment of a boots upgrade. It has the highest upfront cost since it doesn't have any other components other than a recipe, but it has the powerful effect of making your TP scroll unconsumable when used, allowing you to teleport to any friendly enemy structure or even non-hero unit effectively for free. It also gives you a bigger flat move speed bonus than any of the other boots. And it's not too often that a hero wants to get these early, but Batrider and Invoker can make use of the bonuses and get pretty active around the map with early Boots of Travels. Boots of Travel 2 is the upgrade to Boots of Travel. In addition to a move speed upgrade, it makes your teleport faster and allows you to teleport to friendly heroes. It's typically a late game item purchase. Arcane Boots is perhaps the most beloved boots item in the game. The people who build it love it, your teammates love it, the world would be better with more arcane boots in it. However, it's usually confined to the inventories of supports and some mids. It grants a mana regen aura like Ring of Basilius since it upgrades from that, but it can also be activated to instantly restore mana to teammates around you. Try to use it when you have multiple teammates that need a mana boost, including yourself. The more mana you restore with it, the more value you get from it. Guardian Greaves is the upgrade to Arcane Boots, and because of the build path, is usually purchased by supports, but certain offlaners will build it too, like Tidehunter. The active replenishes mana like Arcanes, heals like Mech, and also dispels basic debuffs from the caster. Just like Mech, once used, affected teammates cannot be healed by the active from other copies of this item. Thus, you only need one Greaves at a time unless you really want the dispel. It also has a passive aura that provides health and mana regen as well as armor to nearby teammates. And when an allied hero affected by the aura is below a certain amount of health, the aura effects are amplified for them. Tranquil Boots is another boots upgrade typically bought by supports. They grant a pretty substantial move speed and health regen buff early on, however this effect is disabled upon being attacked by an enemy unit or attacking an enemy hero. This is typically bought by backline supports that don't need the mana provided by arcanes and could use the regen. Lion is a pretty popular Tranquil Boots buyer, but it's also purchased by the likes of Crystal Maiden, who has her mana aura, and Pudge, who could use the regen to sustain himself. Boots of Bearing is a very interesting upgrade to Tranquil Boots, also needs the Drum of Endurance. Unlike Tranq Boots, there's no penalty for attacking nor being attacked, so the regen and move speed are there to stay for the most part. It also inherits Drum's move speed aura. They can also be activated to give nearby teammates the Drum active, which is just more move speed and attack speed, but interestingly, it also gives a very brief moment of slow immunity to all affected units, allowing teammates to get out of sticky situations like Faceless Void's time zone or away from Venom and Viper's slowing strikes. These are items you get for accomplishing certain objectives such as killing Roshan and taking control of certain parts of the map. The Aegis of the Immortal is the main benefit to killing Roshan. This grants the person who picks it up a second life upon being killed. They revive with full health and mana, but their cooldowns are retained, so be wary of that. This item expires if not used after a certain amount of time, but when it's reclaimed, the X-holder gains increased health and mana regen for a short time instead. The person who picks it up is immediately announced to everyone in the game, so the enemy will know you have the Aegis even if they don't click on your inventory. Typically, this is reserved for the team's +1 carry, but can also be given to +2 heroes depending on the match. Storm Spirit, for example, is one of the best Aegis carriers in the game in my opinion. Cheese is another item dropped by Roshan, however it is only dropped upon his second death and if he's in the Dire Pit when he dies. Cheese grants no stats on its own, but is a consumable and when used, it heals the holder for a ton of HP and mana. This item effectively gives the user another life if used at low HP, and since they don't die, effects are retained. That's why I prefer to have Cheese on steroid heroes like Sven and Terrorblade who, when killed, will lose their powerful self buffs and respawn as a neutered version of themselves. You can also sell it for 500 gold, which is, in my opinion, almost never worth it. Roshan's banner has the same spawning mechanics as Cheese, but drops when Roshan dies in the Radiant Pit instead. It's an interesting active that when used at a target location, grants nearby lane creeps the Glyph of Fortification effect, granting damage immunity immunity. It's a powerful pushing tool, especially when sieging high ground. The best part is that as long as creeps are near the banner, they will retain the effect, allowing them to have an indefinite glyph. However, the banner can be broken when placed, so be mindful of when and where to use it. This is typically shoved on supports, but a special mention goes to Elder Titan because this innate gives creeps affected by it bonus damage. Aghanim's Blessing is a consumable Aghanim Scepter dropped by Roshan upon his third death if he was killed in the Dire Pit. It functions exactly like the purchasable version, but it comes at no gold cost and grants the passive stats that a normal Aghs would. Refresher Shard has the same spawning mechanics as the Agh's Blessing, but spawns when killed in the Radiant Pit instead. It functions as a single-use Refresher Orb, giving you a massive advantage in your next team fight. It's typically held by heroes with a big team fight spells that don't already have a Refresher Orb since they share a cooldown. This means the typical Refresher Orb buyers are off the table unless they haven't purchased it yet. However, it's good on carries like Juggernaut and Faceless Void since they don't always build an RO. Healing Lotuses spawn at their respective Lotus pools on both sides of the map. When you pick one up, it will just be a regular Healing Lotus, which is great for skirmishing. You can consume it to instantly regain some health and mana. If you combine 3 Healing Lotuses, they become a Great Healing Lotus, which has stronger healing effects, and if you combine 3 of those, you get the Greater Healing Lotus, which has even more potency. All Lotuses can be consumed for a heal and have a short cooldown when used, and can be forcibly chucked down people's throats like my grandma feeds me whenever I haven't eaten anything yet. The block of cheese is something that I don't think I've ever seen in all my years of playing this godforsaken game. I don't even know what the item icon looked like until I looked it up. Anyway, this is what you get when you combine 3 Greater Healing Lotuses with a single piece of cheese. It can then be used to give a teammate a permanent all damage barrier that regenerates when broken. It effectively gives you plus 500 HP permanently, but it feels like it's just whatever. It's probably only ever in less than 1% of games, and you just have to jump through so many hoops to acquire it. And even then, you could argue that the cheese effect would be somewhat better. It is quite possibly the single rarest item in the game, aside from Grove Bro when I'm playing a ranged hero. Oh, and yeah, I'm doing neutral items too. Okay, so these are weird items that you sometimes get from killing jungle creeps. They drop a token which allows you to choose one of these neutral items from a pool of 5 that changes every game. They also spawn in tiers, with a new tier of neutral items being available at certain points in the game. Each tier of token can only spawn up to 5 times per team, 1 for every player in the game, and the items and tokens can be immediately sent back to the fountain right from your inventory slot. But they have to be ferried out via courier or picked up manually if you want to get them from your base. They're a pretty unique mechanic that adds even more RNG to an already unpredictable game. When they were added, it was pretty controversial, but I've always liked them because they're just fun toys to use. All these get rotated in and out of the game routinely, but I'm only going to be covering what's currently in the game because I don't want to talk about an item that may get added back in and then have it be almost completely different from what it is now, like Royal Jelly. Starting off tier 1s, we got the Trusty Shovel, one of the most beloved neutral items because it has the potential to give you so much value. When used, it has a chance to give you one of a few things: a Healing Salve, a Mango, a Pet Kobold which has an aura that increases your passive gold gain, or a Bounty Rune which gives gold to your entire team. The Bounty Rune is the rarest one, but when used in the river, it has the special mechanic of always spawning a Water Rune, which is really nice for mid laners with bottles. Arcane Ring is pretty much just Arcane Boots, except it has a weaker active and gives different stats. It's never a horrible item to get, especially when you need it. Pigpole is a gimmicky item that gives you the same stats as a crown, but when used, you turn into a pig. You're silenced, disarmed, but at least you're really fast since you also get a move speed buff. It's nice for escapes, but it's never really my first choice. Safety Bubble, my beloved. It gives you an all damage barrier that replenishes when you're not taking damage. It's a budget block of cheese and is never a bad pick. The Seeds of Serenity is probably my favorite tier 1 item out of the current bunch. It gives regen as a stat, but also has an active that lets you create a healing field to give allied units within even more regen. It's great for pushing, for sustaining while farming, for healing teammates. It's just such a versatile item that I always look for it when getting my first token, no matter who I'm playing. Lance of Pursuit is a pretty interesting item that lets your attacks deal more damage to targets from behind while also applying a weak slow. The effect is okay on heroes like Ricky, but an underrated aspect about it is that it gives you almost the same mana as an energy booster. Great on carries. The Occult Bracelet is my go-to when I'm playing a tanky offlaner. It has the passive effect of giving you bonus mana regen whenever you're attacked. Having more mana regen is always good, but it makes more sense on certain heroes like Axe than others. The Duelist Gloves is a decent choice if you're finding yourself skirmishing a lot in the early game or you're just playing carry. It gives damage on its own and gives you attack speed when near an enemy hero. The stats aren't too good, but I'll take it for the extra damage on heroes like Sniper. Though on melee heroes, I'd much rather have. Broom Handle gives you damage, armor, and has a benefit benefit of increasing your melee hero's attack range. It's great for skirmishers in the early game like Monkey King and Slark. Royal Jelly is a very helpful item, but not always my first choice either. This iteration of the item gains charges over time. The more charges it has, the more powerful the active is. When used, it gives your target ally or yourself bonus health and mana regen for a short time. It's nice, but it feels like it takes forever to ramp up though. Faded Brooch is a stat stick that just gives flat mana and move speed. Never a bad item, especially on casters and supports. Ironwood Tree is a gimmick item only used on certain heroes. It instantly creates a tree at a location. The range was nerfed, so it's not too good, but it's still a valuable tool for heroes like Timbersaw and Hoodwink who have special interaction with trees. Spark of Courage is another early game item for skirmishers. It gives you either more damage or armor depending on your current health. Some players like it, but I think it's a bit inconsistent, so I tend to gravitate towards other choices. Moving on to tier 2s, we got the Dragon Scale. This item gives great tanking stats and has a nice passive that makes your attacks deal damage over time to targets, including buildings. It's nice for pushing, but is a must-have on Batrider because it works with his napalm. Whisper of the Dread is a gimmicky item that increases your spell damage at the cost of your daytime vision. I don't like having less vision, so I actually tend to avoid this item. On the other hand, I love Pupil's Gift. It gives you effectively 2,900 gold worth of free stats. Sure, it's not on your primary attribute, but it's more health, armor, and mana. It's nice on uni heroes too, since it gives you half the bonuses on every stat. Grove Bow is an item that I feel like I never get when I actually want it. Whenever I play Sniper, Drow, or Venomancer, I get some bullshit, but if I play like Undying or something, it decides to show up. Anyway, it gives you bonus attack range and makes your attacks reduce enemy magic res. Generally, it's a good pick on ranged heroes for the ranged bonus, but because of the effect, I also get it on casters like Leshrac depending on the game. The Philosopher's Stone is every support's dream. In addition to the stats it gives, it also has a GPM bonus. However, after a certain amount of passive gold is accumulated from it, it disappears and gives you even more gold. Money sooner is always better than money later, so if you're a support player, this item is always worth your consideration. Note that it does reduce your outgoing attack damage, so it's not really a viable pick on most carries. Bullwhip gives nice regen stats and has an active that grants move speed or slows enemies. A solid choice regardless of hero. Orb of Destruction is pretty much the old Orb of Corrosion. It makes your attacks slow and reduce armor. Take it on minus armor stackers or physical damage dealers like Slardar and PA. And if you're a ranged hero, Specialist Array makes your next auto attack hit multiple targets around the main one. But really, you're getting this for the stats. Plus 6 to everything and some extra damage on top of that is quite nice. If you're stacking cast range though, Eye of the Vizier is a pretty good item and worth considering over Philostone if you're a support. It reduces your mana but also increases your mana regen and cast range. There are better cast range items available later on, but note there's no guarantee you'll get them. If you want a chance to get it, you can forgo it, but I tend to go for it for the guaranteed value. It's great on cast range stackers and backliners like Rubik and Lion. Seriously, the drawback is not that noticeable for heroes like them. Vampire Fangs is a sustain item, usually for cores. It's nice for farming as it means you don't have to spend on Morbid Mask or Fairy Out Salve for sustaining yourself versus jungle creeps. Get it if you're a right clicker and especially on heroes like Bristleback. It gives night vision too, which is pretty helpful. Gossamer Cape is an item that exists. When the passive is ready, it makes the next auto attack coming from an enemy miss. It's probably saved people's lives a few times, but I tend to gravitate towards other items for my tier 2 slot. The move speed is nice to have though. The Light Collector is an interesting item that when used destroys trees around you. It also passively provides you with passive health regen during the day and mana regen at night, but if you're too close to a tree, the regen is reduced. It's pretty situational and I only get it against Nature's Prophet or Hoodwink and there's nothing better to pick. Iron Talon went from meme to dream and is quite honestly a pretty good item for farming carries. When used, it immediately removes a large portion of the target non-hero unit's current health. It works on ancients and lets you clear camps quite fast, especially since the stats are quite good for farming too. You can also use it to cut down trees much like a Quelling Blade. Next up, tier 3s. Defiant Shell is a pretty good item for right clickers. It makes you immediately counterattack as long as the opponent is within range. I like it on heroes like Legion Commander and Ursa because it combos well with them. Vambrace gives you about 1400 gold in terms of raw stats, but it also gives extra stats depending on the attribute it uses. Strength gives magic res, Agi gives attack speed, and Int gives spell amp. It's an okay choice, but there are usually more specialized choices in the pool. Paladin Sword or just Pal Sword is Vampire Fangs but better. Not only does it give you damage in addition to lifesteal and spell lifesteal, but it also increases all healing you provide like Holy Locket. It's great on carries, but it's not uncommon to get it on heroes like Io, Dazzle, and Omni Knight. Nemesis Curse is a risky item that provides a ton of damage potential. Not only is the damage on it quite nice, but it also makes your attacks apply a damage amp debuff on your last attack unit. It comes at the cost of increasing all damage you take from any source though. Vindicator's Axe is a carry item that helps you in persisting through enemy debuffs. On its own, it gives 1,000 golds worth of attack speed and some slow resistance, but when you're silenced, you deal extra damage, and when you're stunned, you gain a ton of armor. The best hero you can probably use it on is a Mask of Madness user, since they have easy access to the silence damage. Sven comes to mind because he also benefits from the slow res. The Dandelion Amulet is a decent choice against comps that are heavy on the magic side. It gives you a spell shield. I usually take something else over this one. Not to say that it's bad, it's just there are far more interesting options. Craggy Coat gives you good armor and a bit of health off rip, but can be activated to give you even more armor for a short time at the cost of some move speed. I've used it on Axe for the synergy, but not much on mostly anyone else. Enchanted Quiver passively gives you bonus attack range when you're ranged, but every now and then makes your next auto attack deal bonus damage, ignore evasion, and gain even more range. Most ranged hitters will find a use for it, but its best user is Dark Willow, who can stack the attack range and damage bonus from her W and make it unable to miss. Elven Tunic is a stat stick that gives attack speed, evasion, and move speed. It's never a bad choice if you're playing a carry. Cloak of Flames gives you some tanking stats, and it also gives you a budget Radiance burn effect around your hero. It stacks with Radiance too, so it's nice if you're already a Radiance carrier. It's my go-to item on Pudge and Necrophos if I'm playing them. Ceremonial Robe decreases status resistance and magic res of nearby enemies. If you're a frontliner or Blink Initiator, it's a solid choice and worth getting. I personally always get it on Axe if it's available. Psychic Headband gives you intelligence and cast range and has an active that's just a get off me tool. Since it gives you percentage based intelligence, it's nice to have on heroes that want to stack int like Silencer and Skywrath Mage. Doubloon is probably the single most niche item in the game. It gives good regen, but you're either trading your mana for more HP or HP for more mana. It's only really good on Medusa and OD with Aghanims. Moving on to tier 4s, Timeless Relic is a powerful caster item, granting bonus spell damage and debuff duration to anyone who gets it. It's great on most mid laners that rely on their spells to deal damage, and it can also be used by almost anyone with a stun. Ascetics Cap momentarily gives you a bunch of status resistance and slow resistance when you're hit with a debuff. It's nice if you're finding yourself getting jumped, but I personally prefer other items over this one. Aviana's Feather is not really my favorite neutral item, but it does give great move speed and evasion, which is always nice. If you don't have anything else that synergizes with you, this thing's decent on anyone. Though honestly, I find I'm very rarely able to use the passive component of being able to traverse terrain when I'm low on HP, because I usually just end up getting insta-deleted. Ninja Gear is a pretty fun item because it lets you play a lot sneakier. The active gives you the smoked condition for yourself. It's great on agi carries purely for the stats, but it's also a good pick for Blink Initiators or heroes with great catch. Telescope is a pretty nice item to have on your support. The lower scan cooldown is pretty underestimated as it allows you to be more proactive with it, and the bonus cast range and attack range are granted as an aura, which makes it really good for attack range stacking. However, you should always announce to your team when you get it because you only really need one. While the effects are good, it feels horrible to get on carries generally because the item itself grants you no stats. Trickster Cloak is a defensive item that lets you turn invisible for a short time. It's most powerful if your team doesn't already have a source of invis, and the raw stats on it are pretty nice to have too. Stormcrafter is a decent item for frontliners as it causes you to deal damage to nearby enemies and slow them momentarily. The move speed and mana regen are nice too, but it doesn't particularly stand out to me. It's nice on heroes like Razor though. Ancient Guardian is a big damage item. 50 damage on its own is nothing to scoff at, but this doubles whenever you're near an Ancient. That means whether you're breaking enemy high ground or defending your own. It's nice if you need the raw damage, but it lacks the utility of other tier 4 items. Havoc Hammer is an item that's pretty slept on. It gives you a good chunk of strength and some decent damage if you're a strength hero. But the best part is the active that pulls enemies around you, slows them, and deals damage to them based on your strength stat. It's a great option for strength stackers to help you stay on top of your foes. Pudge and Centaur in particular are good carriers for this kind of item. Mindbreaker is the bane of pucks, spirits, and other highly mobile heroes everywhere. It gives a decent bit of attack speed and makes all your attacks apply a bit of extra magic damage too. When its effect is ready, it makes your next attack apply a silence, which can catch a lot of players off guard and generally throws people off. Rattle Cage is a tanking item of tier 4s. It gives you quite a bit of armor while also causing you to zap nearby enemies after taking a certain amount of damage. The zap deals a bit of chip damage and greatly slows enemy when procced. This is pretty much only used if you're a frontliner and have a huge HP bar though. Ogre Seal Totem is a mobility tool and pretty much just lets you dash in a certain direction, bouncing twice. This lets you deal damage and slow enemies caught in the radius. It's a nice escape tool, pretty good on heroes that could use a bit more mobility or just a get out of jail free card. And finally, tier 5s are the crazy game-breaking items that have some insane effects on them. Most games don't last long enough to the point where they drop, but since I only play Turbo, I get to see them pretty often. Force Boots give you hella move speed and health regen while also letting you manipulate a unit's movement by pushing them around just like a Force Staff. It has the added benefit of dispelling basic debuffs on cast if used on an ally or yourself. It also unlocks the move speed cap for your hero, letting you go really fast if you can abuse it. Since it's a boots item, it also grants the move speed boost from boots, allowing you to replace your boots if you choose to do so. Force boots is always a good pick. It gives so much mobility and utility that anyone can use it. Supports, right clickers, casters, tanks, you can never really go wrong with force boots. It also lets you kite enemies' heroes incredibly well. Stygian Desolator is Desolator's slightly older twin brother. It gives a bit more damage and has a stronger minus armor effect, and on its own it doesn't really give as much as the other tier 5s, but remember that the debuff is separate from a regular Desolator's, meaning that the minus armor from both of them stack and it can be used on towers. Don't sleep on this item in heavy physical comps. Searstone is every backline caster's dream. It's just a really fun item because it gives you a ton of cast range, vision, and mana regen. It also lets you reveal an area on the map globally. Heroes like Rubik and Disruptor, who just want as much cast range as possible, really want to get this item so they can play comfortably distant from the enemy team. I never get it on them though because I have garbage luck. Against the right team comp, Mirror Shield can be incredibly busted. It gives you the benefit of being able to block and reflect a targeted ability every few seconds, much like AM's E. However, unlike that spell, there is no visual indication for when it's up, which makes it incredibly frustrating to fight against. You can cast your ult as Lion only to end up fingering yourself because you didn't mentally count 12 seconds after breaking the effect. If it's a good Linken's game, it's a good Mirror Shield game. Apex is an item that just straight up gives you plus 70 of your primary attribute, or plus 25 in all stats if you're a uni hero. It's decent on certain heroes like Drow, Morphling, and even Pudge, but there are just other items that I would rather take. Raw stats isn't too nice unless your hero synergizes incredibly well with it, but there are just other more busted effects that you could take advantage of at plus 60 minutes into the game. Book of the Dead is a slept on item. It's not particularly flashy, but it calls you to summon a few Necronomicon creeps when used. These are special units that have unique abilities. Blue guy has a move speed aura and a point and click dispel, and red guy burns mana, deals damage when he's killed, and has true sight. The passive True Sight from Red Guy alone makes this item incredibly powerful against the right comp. However, it's just generally a good item for pushing and ending the game after winning a team fight. Not to mention the stats are pretty insane. Arcanist's armor is the actual strongest tier 5 item in the game. When used properly, this item will straight up win you a team fight. On its own, it gives you and your team armor and magic resistance, but when you use the active, you gain damage reflection on the aura, meaning a portion of all damage taken is reflected back at the enemy. It's very easy to catch enemies off guard with it, and I've won so many team fights with it, I just kind of refuse to get it in my games out of principle. Seriously, do not sleep on this, just remember to use the active. Pirate Hat is a fun item that gives a ton of attack speed, and you can also use it to spawn a bounty rune. It's nicer when your teammate is just a handful of gold away from buyback, and it just helps your team keep a net worth lead. Though, if the game already hits 60 minutes, a net worth lead probably isn't super important. Giant's Ring makes you big, gaining move speed and strength, and gives you free pathing. And when you're on top of an enemy, you deal damage to them based on your strength, but you probably can't get on top of anyone because, let's face it, you're a bed at bottom that can't get a date. Unwavering Condition is probably the single most situational tier 5 item in the game. This item practically makes you immune to magic damage, but it sets your health to just 1800. It can never be altered. Against a purely magic damage comp, this item just wins you the game, but I wouldn't recommend it otherwise. It also makes you small. Book of Shadows is a sleeper of a tier 5 item. This lets you make a target unit untargetable to your enemies, silencing them, muting them, and disarming them, and applying a basic dispel. It can also be used as a save or as a tool to throw off an enemy. Just like with Willow's W, people affected by this can still be affected by AoE effects. Magic Lamp is a bailout tool. After falling low enough on HP, you gain a chunky heal and a hard dispel. It can help if you're getting blown up consistently, but there are other things you can do besides blowing your almighty tier 5 item slot on this thing. It could be good, and I could be completely wrong, but I just prefer to get something more fun than this. Warlock's Black Grimoire is a special item exclusive to Warlock when he takes the facet. Every time he joins in a kill with it in his inventory, he gains a charge. Warlock can then eat the book like a weirdo to gain experience based on the number of charges it has. Witch Doctor's Gree is an item that is granted by Witch Doctor as innate. He starts the game with it, but it can't be dropped nor placed in the backpack. When Witch Doctor dies, the gold he loses on death is added to the item, and the item also passively gains gold every few seconds. At any point, Witch Doctor can eat the Gree to gain all the gold it has accumulated. And that's every single item in Dota 2 explained. You're welcome, and ace out.